The rain had already soaked through my coat by the time I reached the porch. My old porch. I still remember the sound my cane made when it hit those wooden steps. My wooden steps. The ones I sanded myself 30 years ago. Only now they were painted white. The paint was fresh, the smell sharp and wrong. Before I could even knock, the door opened. A woman stood there, holding a mug of coffee that used to be mine. She was smiling, polite, cautious. "Can I help you, sir?" For a moment, I thought I had the wrong address. The mailbox still said 123, Willow Drive, just as it always had. But behind her, through the hallway, I saw a golden retriever sprint across the hardwood floor, dragging one of my old blankets. "My blanket. This is my house," I said slowly. "Arthur Hale. I built this place 30 years ago." Her smile wavered. She looked at me as if trying to decide whether I was joking or senile. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale, but we bought this property 3 weeks ago. From your daughter, Clara Bennett." Her words were clean and professional, the kind you say when you think you're dealing with a confused old man. But I wasn't confused. I was waking up. My heart stumbled in my chest. "You bought it." She nodded. "She said you were." She hesitated, then added softly, "Gone. Gone." That single word hit harder than any heart attack. Dead. My daughter had told the world I was dead. The woman said something else, something about legal papers and title transfers, but her voice blurred beneath the rush of rain and blood in my ears. I just stood there, staring into the house that wasn't mine anymore. The photographs were gone, replaced by minimalist frames. The scent of cedar that once filled every corner had been washed away by something synthetic. When she gently closed the door, I caught my reflection in the glass. A stranger, gray hair plastered to his forehead, hospital wristbands still faint on his skin, eyes wide and hollow. That was me. The taxi driver was waiting. "Everything okay, sir?" I nodded, but the word that came out of my mouth was empty. "Drive." He dropped me off at a cheap motel near the industrial district. The sign flickered, half the letters dead, buzzing like a dying fly. Inside, the room smelled of damp carpet and loneliness. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, coat still wet, shoes dripping. Outside, the city hummed. Cars, rain, distant sirens, the rhythm of life continuing without me. 3 weeks ago, I believed my family loved me. Now I wasn't sure they ever did. When I woke up in the hospital, Clara was the first face I saw. Her hair tied back neatly, her smile rehearsed, soft enough to look caring, but stiff enough to hide something else. "Dad," she'd said, "you scared me half to death. You need to rest. I'll handle everything." I remember her perfume, expensive and out of place in that sterile room. She brought coffee for the nurses, smiled at the doctors, called herself the responsible one. The next morning, she came back with papers. "Just some hospital forms," she'd said. "Routine stuff for your insurance." My hand was shaking from medication, my chest still sore. I didn't question her. She was my daughter. I signed. The signature was barely legible, but it was enough. When she kissed my forehead before leaving, I thought it was love. Now I know it was relief. Back in the motel, I found an old newspaper on the nightstand. The real estate section caught my eye. There it was. My house. Listed under recently sold. I stared at the price and felt my stomach turn. They sold it for half its value. That's when I understood. It was never about helping me. It was about getting rid of me. I called her. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. Finally, my son Ethan picked up after 3 rings. "Dad," he said quickly, his tone like someone handling a ticking bomb. "Please don't make this harder. Clara did what was best for you." "For me?" I said quietly. "Selling my home while I was unconscious?" Silence. Then the line went dead. The next day, I took a bus to the nursing home Clara had arranged. It looked like a forgotten school. Peeling paint, cracked windows, the smell of bleach failing to mask something sour. The nurse at the desk smiled too brightly. "Welcome, Mr. Hale. We'll make sure you're comfortable here." Comfortable. That word has a way of sounding like buried. I nodded, pretending to be exactly what they thought I was. Old, tired, harmless. They gave me a room at the end of the hall, next to a man who never spoke. I unpacked what little I had left, a small notebook, a pen, and a photograph of my late wife, Eleanor. She was the one who had loved this house the most. She'd planted the roses by the porch, painted the kitchen walls, and filled every corner with warmth. I promised her before she died that the house would stay in the family. Now it was gone, sold by the very people she'd trusted. That night, I placed her photo on the windowsill. Rain streaked down the glass outside, soft and rhythmic. "I failed you," I whispered. But even as I said it, something inside me shifted. The thing about getting old is that everyone assumes your time is over. But what they forget is that you've had decades to learn how people work, how they lie, how they break promises, how they underestimate quiet men. I started small. I borrowed a notebook from the nurse's station and began sketching. Not buildings this time, plans. I remembered every detail of that property. The layout, the zoning lines, the tiny adjacent lot behind the backyard that Clara had never cared about, the one technically still registered under my name. She had sold the house, yes, but not the land. A sliver of dirt, barely big enough for a shed. But it was mine, and that was enough. Every day, I played the role. The frail old man who asked for extra blankets, who shuffled down the hallway, who nodded politely during bingo nights. But behind the act, I was building something. I used the communal computer in the recreation room to send emails. I contacted my old friend Sam Rodriguez, a contractor I hadn't spoken to in 10 years. I told him I had a small private project, nothing fancy. He didn't ask questions. Money wasn't a problem. Clara thought she'd clean me out, but she'd forgotten the secondary savings account in my company's name. I'd opened it decades ago for emergencies. This, I decided, qualified. Weeks passed. Clara didn't visit. Neither did Ethan. They sent polite text messages, written like legal disclaimers. "Hope you're doing well, Dad. We'll come by soon." They never did. But I didn't need them. Every night, I sat by the window, watching the lights of Seattle in the distance. The rain blurred them into soft streaks of gold, like the city itself was weeping. And there, in the quiet, I found something unexpected, peace. Because I wasn't planning revenge out of hatred. It wasn't about rage or punishment. It was about dignity. They took everything, my home, my name, my place in the world. Now I would take back what they feared most, their comfort. The morning I left the nursing home, I walked out slowly, cane tapping on the linoleum floor. The nurse asked, "Big day ahead, Mr. Hale?" I smiled faintly. Something like that. Outside, the air smelled like rain and gasoline. I hailed a cab. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Willow Drive," I said. When we turned onto that familiar street, my heart clenched. Through the window, I saw Clara on the porch, laughing with her husband. Their children ran across the yard I built with my own hands. They looked so happy, and that was good. I wanted them to be happy for now, because comfort breeds blindness, and blind people never see the storm coming until it's too late. As the taxi pulled away, I whispered to myself, "Let them think I'm gone. I'm just getting started." In the rearview mirror, I caught my reflection, older, thinner, but alive in a way I hadn't been in years. They thought they'd buried me. They had no idea they'd just planted something that was about to grow back stronger. In the nursing home, days don't pass, they dissolve. One blurs into another, like watercolors left out in the rain. Breakfast at 7, pills at 9, television humming nonsense until noon. If you sit still long enough, the walls begin to talk. They whisper resignation. They teach you how to disappear quietly. That's what most men here have done, vanish before dying. But not me. I kept my window cracked open, just enough to hear the rain. The nurses didn't like that, said it made the room too cold. But the sound reminded me that the world was still moving out there. Somewhere beyond those damp walls, people worked, schemed, loved, lied, including my daughter. Every night, I replayed the sound of her voice when she'd said, "You trust me, right?" I had trusted her so completely that I'd given her not just my signature, but my silence. Now silence would become my weapon. One evening, during dinner, I met a man named Walter Pierce. He was in his 70s, a retired accountant who'd lost his wife to cancer. His hands shook from Parkinson's, but his mind was sharp. We shared a table every night after that. He talked. I listened. On the fourth evening, between spoonfuls of soup, Walter said something that made me stop breathing. "I did some taxes for a young woman recently," he said casually. "Nice girl. Pretty. Name was Clara, I think. Clara Bennett." I set my spoon down. "Did you say Bennett?" He nodded. "Yeah. She came in with her husband. Wanted advice about capital gains. Said she'd sold her late father's property. Smart move, honestly. The market's rough right now." Late father. I smiled politely, but inside, something sharp twisted. She had filed me as dead. That explained everything. The bank transfers, the house sale, the silence. My daughter had forged my death to erase me completely, so she could pocket the estate. Walter went on, unaware he'd just handed me the missing piece of the puzzle. They were thinking about flipping another house too. Some fixer-upper downtown. My pulse quickened. Downtown. That was the same district where I'd secretly bought the small foreclosed property under my alias. Poetic, I thought. They were chasing new profit, while I was quietly building their reckoning right across the street. The next morning, I called Sam Rodriguez, my old contractor friend. He laughed when he heard my voice. Arthur Hale, I thought you were 6 feet under, man. Not yet, I said. I need your help. Sam had been with me on dozens of projects back in the day, patient, loyal, and most importantly, discreet. I told him about the small plot of land and how I wanted to build something simple on it. A studio, I said. Something that looks modest, but strong. Very strong. He didn't ask questions. He just said, send me the plans. And that night, I drew them. My hand still shook, but muscle memory guided me. I sketched quietly under the dim lamp while the rest of the home slept. Lines, measurements, weight distribution, the old rhythm returned. The old me returned. Each beam, each joint, each screw placement was deliberate. It wasn't just a studio I was building. It was a message. By the end of the week, I'd set up a schedule. Mornings, I played the obedient patient. Therapy, medication, small talk. Afternoons, I worked in secret. Evenings, I wrote. At first, the nurses thought I was just journaling. They didn't realize those pages were filled with plans, legal research, contacts, and every detail of Clara's fraud. I'd learned something long ago as an architect. Every structure, no matter how beautiful, hides a flaw. And every person, no matter how powerful, leaves a trace. Clara's trace was digital. She had filed false death certificates, transferred ownership through fake consent forms, and wired the funds into a personal account she thought I'd never find. But she'd forgotten one thing. She used my social security number to make it all look official. That meant everything she did was still under my name. And if I chose to, I could make her entire little empire collapse. Legally, elegantly, silently. One night, I found myself staring at Eleanor's photograph again. Her smile was the same, warm, unguarded, forgiving. I whispered, "You'd tell me not to do this, wouldn't you?" In my mind, I could hear her laugh softly, the way she used to when I'd overthink a project. "Just build what feels right," she'd say. And that's what I intended to do. 2 weeks later, the construction began. Sam handled everything. His crew worked quietly, off the books, mostly at night. The small plot of land behind my old home was being transformed, not into a studio, but into something far more symbolic. A small cottage. Warm, simple, peaceful, yet with a single panoramic window directly facing Clara's new house. From that window, I could see their porch light flicker every evening. I could see my grandchildren playing. They had no idea the man watching from across the street was the ghost they'd buried. Meanwhile, at the nursing home, whispers started. "Mr. Hale seems different," one nurse said. "He's always on the phone lately," another added. I smiled every time I overheard them. Suspicion was good. It meant I was becoming visible again. The director eventually called me into her office. "Arthur, you've been here for months," she said kindly. "But we're not a business center. We can't allow—" "I understand," I interrupted, standing up slowly. "You'll have my room cleared by tomorrow." Her eyes widened. "You're leaving?" "Yes," I said. "I've remembered who I am." The day I left, rain poured over Seattle in long silver threads. I didn't have much. One small suitcase, a stack of blueprints, and a letter I'd written to Clara but would never send. I walked through the city, cane tapping against wet pavement, until I reached the small new cottage. The windows glowed softly in the mist. Sam's truck was parked outside. "Looks good, doesn't it?" he said, wiping his hands on a rag. I nodded. "It's perfect." He hesitated. "Arthur, are you sure about this? You could tell her what she did. Take her to court. Get your money back." I smiled faintly. "No, Sam. Courtrooms can't give me what I want." "What do you want then?" "To be remembered," I said. "And for her to understand what it feels like to lose everything she thought was hers." That night, as I sat in the new house, I lit a single lamp. From across the street, Clara's home looked like a postcard, warm, Beautiful, false. I watched through the rain-spattered window as she tucked her children into bed, kissed Mark goodnight, and turned off the lights. They had no idea the man they declared dead was watching, alive, and already rewriting the story. The silence of the forgotten isn't weakness. It's preparation. And as the rain whispered against the glass, I finally smiled. They thought they'd erased me. They didn't know they'd just given me the perfect blueprint. It started with a letter. No threats. No names. No anger. Just 12 words, written in neat, familiar handwriting. Not everything you sold was yours to sell. A.H. I mailed it anonymously, with no return address. I imagined the sound of her opening it. The sharp inhale, the confusion, the quick glance toward her husband. It wasn't about scaring her. Not yet. It was about planting a thought, a splinter she couldn't ignore. Because fear doesn't start with shouting. It starts with doubt. From the window of my small cottage, I watched her for days. Clara's house, my house, stood across the street like a monument to her betrayal. Every morning she left for work in her gray sedan, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. Every evening, she came back smiling, unaware that the man she'd buried was watching her live the life he built. Sometimes I saw Mark watering the plants I had once planted with Eleanor. Sometimes I saw my grandchildren running barefoot on the same wooden deck I'd designed. And every time, it hurt. But pain can be useful when you know how to shape it. Inside my cottage, I had built a wall covered in sketches, notes, and photographs. The new structure I was creating wasn't physical anymore. It was strategic. At the center of it all, a single goal. Restore my name. Remove hers. It began with the documents. The nursing home still had all my medical records, including the day Clara filed my death notification. With Walter's help, I obtained copies. Then I visited the clerk's office downtown. Old building, fading lights, the kind of place people forget exists. The clerk looked at me in disbelief when I handed her the file. "Sir, this certificate says you're deceased." "Then it's wrong," I said calmly. She blinked. "Well, yes, obviously." Her fingers trembled as she processed the correction. Bureaucracy is slow, but truth, once set in motion, is unstoppable. By the end of that week, the state of Washington officially recognized Arthur Hale as alive again. And that changed everything. Because now every action Clara had taken using my deceased status became fraud. Legal, traceable, punishable. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. Revenge through law is too clean, too quick. I wanted understanding first. I wanted her to see me again, to realize what she'd done, not to a stranger, but to her father. So I waited. On a gray Thursday morning, I saw Mark leave early. The kids were at school. Clara was home alone. I walked across the street slowly, leaning on my cane, the rain whispering around me. When she opened the door, she didn't recognize me at first. Her eyes went wide. "Dad." The word trembled in her mouth, like she wasn't sure it was real. I smiled. "You look surprised. You told the world I was dead. I assumed you'd be relieved to see I'm not." She froze, her hand still gripping the doorknob. "Dad, it's not what you think." I raised a hand. "Don't lie, Clara. Not to me. Not anymore." The rain poured harder, soaking the edges of my coat. For a moment, neither of us moved. Only the sound of water filled the silence between us. Finally, she whispered. I didn't know what else to do. "You were in the hospital, and the bills. Don't you dare blame this on love," I said quietly. "You didn't sell my house to save me. You sold it because it was easier than caring." Her lips trembled. "You don't understand, I understand perfectly." I turned away before she could finish. Because in her eyes, I saw something worse than guilt. I saw relief that I was still leaving. That night, I sat alone in the cottage, rain tapping on the window. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt hollow. Revenge is supposed to taste sweet, but in truth, it begins bitter. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, something I hadn't done in years. The smell reminded me of Eleanor. She used to say, "Forgiveness is a choice, but so is remembering." I wasn't ready to forgive, but I would make sure they remembered. Over the next few weeks, things began to change across the street. Mark started arguing more often. I could hear muffled voices through the rain. Clara looked tired, paranoid. She began locking the gate at night, double-checking the doors. Sometimes, she'd stare across the street toward my window, though she couldn't see me behind the dim light. She must have known. Somewhere deep down, She must have felt me watching. Then came the second letter. This one arrived with an envelope stamped confidential. Inside was a single page, a printed bank statement showing a transaction from her account to a private contractor she'd used to falsify the property papers. There was no signature, no message. Just the word copy written in red ink. I didn't need to send more. I just had to remind her, I know everything. That night, I watched from my window as she stood in the kitchen, holding the paper, hands shaking. She tore it to pieces, but even from across the street, I saw the tears. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not pity. Just silence. But silence can only hold so long before it turns into thunder. The next morning, I got a call from Sam. "Arthur, you'd better come see this," he said. When I arrived at the site, he handed me a letter, a formal notice. "City inspection," he explained. "They're questioning the construction permits for your property. Someone filed a complaint." Clara. Of course she did. It was her instinct. When cornered, strike first. I smiled faintly. "That's fine. Let them come." "What are you planning?" Sam asked. "Something she won't see coming." The inspector came 3 days later. He was polite but curious. "Odd case," he said. "Usually these anonymous reports come from neighbors worried about safety. This one specifically mentioned inheritance fraud." I kept my tone calm. "That's odd. I'm just building a small studio." He smiled. "Seems like more than a studio, sir." I just shrugged. "Maybe it's a place to rest." When he left, I locked the door, walked to the back wall, and uncovered the frame I'd hidden beneath a tarp. A simple wooden structure holding dozens of documents, blueprints, and photographs pinned together like a map of the truth. Every signature, every false claim, every transaction. A timeline of betrayal, laid bare, line by line. It wasn't rage that guided me anymore. It was precision. That evening, as the sky darkened, I stepped outside. Across the street, Clara stood by her mailbox, holding another envelope. This one was official, from the county clerk's office. She tore it open. I could see the moment realization hit her. Her father's name had been reinstated as legally alive. Her body stiffened. Her hand covered her mouth. Mark came outside, confused. She showed him the letter. He turned pale. I watched as he looked up, directly at me. Our eyes met across the rain. He grabbed her arm, said something I couldn't hear, and ushered her inside. The door closed. The lights dimmed. I stood there in the dark, the rain soaking my face, and whispered to the night, "Now you finally see me." That was the moment I realized there was no going back. Not for me. Not for her. She had killed the father I once was. Now she'd have to live with the man I'd become. And as the thunder rolled over Seattle, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't just take back what was mine. I'd make her wish she'd never taken it at all. Rain has a way of making everything sound honest. The truth drips slow, steady, impossible to ignore. By November, I'd learned the rhythm of their household. Mark left at 7:20 every morning. Clara's car followed 5 minutes later. The kids' school bus rolled away at 7:45. And then silence. That was when I worked. From my small cottage, I rebuilt not just my name, but her world in reverse. Every blueprint I'd ever drawn, every permit I'd ever filed, I still had copies of them. And I knew exactly where to find the cracks in any structure, including hers. The first crack was Mark. He was a decent man, naive, maybe, but decent. A mechanical engineer, devoted to family, the kind of man who still believed in honesty. He didn't know what Clara had done. She'd told him I'd died peacefully, leaving the house to her. So I gave him the truth, quietly, gently, devastatingly. I mailed him an envelope containing copies of the original deed transfer and my hospital signature, dated while I was still alive. On top of the documents, a short handwritten note. "Ask your wife where she got this signature." No threats, no accusations, just the question that could break a marriage. I watched from the window that evening as Mark came home. He didn't hug her. He didn't kiss her cheek. He just held the papers in his hand, his expression blank, his movements too still. They went inside. Minutes later, I saw lights flicker in the kitchen, shadows moving fast, hands waving. A door slammed. Voices rose. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I had built enough homes to recognize the sound of one collapsing. The next morning, she looked different. Eyes swollen, hair tied too tight, movements restless. She kept glancing toward my side of the street, even though she couldn't see through the fogged glass. Fear looks good on people who used to smile while they lied. But I wasn't done. That was only the first echo. The second one came from the past, from Eleanor. Before she died, my wife had written letters. Dozens of them. To Clara. To Ethan. To me. I had kept them in a wooden box in my study. When Clara sold the house, she'd never bothered to open the drawers she'd emptied. But I had. And I found the box again. One of the letters was addressed to my sweet Clara. Eleanor's handwriting, soft, flowing, warm. I read it, and my chest tightened. If you ever feel lost, remember what your father built for us. He didn't just build walls. He built love into every inch of this home. Never forget that. She had forgotten. So I reminded her. I made copies of that letter and left one on her porch in an unmarked envelope. When she found it the next morning, she looked around wildly, as if the dead themselves had come calling. She stood there for a long time, clutching the letter to her chest, trembling. For a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who built blanket forts in my office and called me Papa Bear. But pity is a dangerous thing. It dulls the blade. I turned away. Days turned into weeks. The more Clara tried to move on, the more the world refused to let her. Her colleagues began whispering after a local journalist published an anonymous tip, one about fraudulent estate transfers and a family scandal. The journalist's envelope had arrived from a certain anonymous source, containing all the proof. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. The story spread quietly, just enough to make her nervous, to make her wake up every morning wondering if today would be the day her name hit the headlines. Meanwhile, I lived simply. Coffee at dawn. Sketches after breakfast. A short walk around the block. The world saw an old man enjoying his retirement. But I was building something far more intricate than architecture. I was building consequence. Sometimes at night, I would hear her crying through the rain. Seattle houses are close. Sound travels. And sometimes, for a second, I almost felt sorry. Then I remembered the look on that new homeowner's face when she told me Clara had said I was gone. Gone. Dead. Forgotten. No. She would learn what those words really meant. One morning, I visited the nursing home again, not as a resident, but as a donor. The director blinked in surprise when she saw me. Mr. Hale? I thought. Yes, I interrupted, smiling. A lot of people did. I handed her a check, a generous one. For renovations, I said. New paint. New lights. Maybe some music in the halls. Her eyes welled up. That's so kind of you. It's not kindness, I said softly. It's remembering where I started rebuilding. Walking out of that building felt different this time. I wasn't leaving weakness behind. I was reclaiming dignity. The next letter I sent was to Ethan, my son. Unlike Clara, he wasn't cruel, just cowardly. He'd gone along with her lies because it was easier. His letter was simple. You don't need to choose sides. The truth will do that for you. He didn't reply, but a week later, he came to see me. He stood awkwardly at my doorstep, soaked by rain, guilt written all over his face. Dad, I don't even know where to start. Start with honesty, I said. He told me everything. How Clara had manipulated him, convinced him that I'd wanted to move into the nursing home, that the sale was a blessing. She had lied to everyone, even him. By the time he left, he was shaking. What are you going to do to her? I smiled faintly. Nothing violent. Nothing cruel. Just truth. That truth arrived at Clara's door one cold December morning, carried by a county official with a badge. She opened it to find 2 letters. One from the bank, freezing her accounts pending investigation, and another from the state, confirming an active case for property fraud and falsified death records. I watched her sink to the floor through the window. She covered her face, sobbing. Mark stood behind her, silent, unreadable. He didn't reach to comfort her. He just turned and walked away. I thought I'd feel joy. I didn't. I just felt quiet. Revenge, I realized, doesn't heal you. It doesn't fill the hole they carved in you. It just lets you stand at the edge of it without falling in. That night, I took Eleanor's letter from my pocket and read it again. Her words glowed under the lamplight. Arthur, you always fix things. Maybe that's your curse, or your gift. Maybe it was both. Across the street, Clara's house went dark. For the first time in months, there were no lights, no laughter, no sound. She had built her comfort on the foundation of lies, and I had quietly removed every beam. She would lose the house soon. The investigation would ensure that. And maybe, someday, she'd understand what I tried to teach her, that love and greed can't share a roof. I poured myself a cup of coffee and watched the rain slide down the window. In the reflection, I saw the ghost she had created and the man I had become. For the first time in years, I didn't feel broken. I just felt finished. But destiny has its own blueprints. And just when I thought the house of lies had finally collapsed, I received a letter of my own. A plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. Clara, sitting alone on a park bench, her eyes red, holding a folded piece of paper. On the back of the photo, in her handwriting, "Please, I need to see you." I set the picture down. The rain outside grew heavier. For months, I had dreamed of this, her begging for forgiveness, for understanding, for a chance to explain. But now that the moment had come, I wasn't sure what I'd say. Because once you've torn down a house, you can't just live in its ruins. You either rebuild, or you walk away forever. For 3 nights, I didn't sleep. The photograph lay on my desk, edges curling under the soft glow of the lamp. It was the first thing I saw when I woke and the last thing I saw before I closed my eyes. Clara, sitting alone on a park bench, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tight. The message scrawled on the back in shaky handwriting. "Please, I need to see you." I told myself not to go, that she didn't deserve forgiveness, not even my attention, that she had chosen greed over blood and had already written my obituary with her own hand. But there's something about a father's heart. It doesn't retire from loving, even after betrayal. Love doesn't vanish. It just goes quiet and waits. So I waited too. 3 days. 3 long nights of pacing the floor, sipping bitter coffee, trying to convince myself I could live without ever hearing her voice again. But every time I looked at that photograph, I saw not the woman who sold my life, but the little girl who once drew me cards that said, "Best dad in the world." By the 4th morning, I knew I'd go. The sky was gray, the kind of gray only Seattle knows. Heavy, endless, soaked in silence. I wore my dark coat and the scarf Eleanor had knitted years ago. The air smelled of wet pine and distant smoke. I reached Maplewood Park just before noon. The pond was half frozen, the ducks gone, the benches slick with drizzle. And there she was, sitting exactly where the photo had shown her, eyes cast down, clutching a folder to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her alive. When she looked up and saw me, she froze. Her lips parted, trembling. "Dad." The sound of that word nearly broke me. It had been months since I'd heard it. Months since it had meant anything real. I stopped a few feet away. "You look cold," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. She gave a weak laugh, half sob, half exhale. "I deserve worse." "Maybe," I said. "But you asked to see me. I didn't think you'd come." I almost didn't. For a while, neither of us spoke. The wind stirred the pond, and a thin sheet of ice cracked softly across its surface. The city beyond was just noise, a distant hum, far removed from this tiny pocket of reckoning. Finally, she said, "Everything's gone, Dad. The house, the money, Mark. He left last week. He couldn't handle it. He said I ruined everything." "You did," I said simply. She looked down at her hands. Her fingers were raw from the cold, her nails chipped. "I know." "Why?" She flinched at that word, one syllable, but heavier than any sentence. "After Mom died, I was scared. You were always the strong one. When you got sick, I panicked. I thought you'd never recover. The bills were piling up, the house repairs, Mark's job was unstable. I thought if I sold the house, I could buy time, fix things later. But then, her voice broke. Then it got easier to lie than to tell the truth. I stared at her, the daughter I'd raised, the woman I no longer recognized. The lines of her face were older now, but beneath them I saw the same child who once begged me to read bedtime stories twice. "You told the world I was dead." She squeezed her eyes shut. "Because I didn't want them to know the truth, that I failed you. That I didn't want the responsibility." "Responsibility," I echoed bitterly. "That's all I ever asked of you. Not perfection, not money, just honesty." Tears streamed down her cheeks. I was ashamed. And once it started, I didn't know how to stop. I kept telling myself I'd make it right. "And did you?" She looked up at me, eyes red. "No." I sat beside her. The wood of the bench was cold and wet, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, we were side by side, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as 2 people standing in the ruins of what once was love. She opened the folder in her lap. Inside were papers, receipts, bank statements, the title deed. I was going to bring these to you, she whispered. Before the investigation. Before the reporters. I just wanted you to know I wasn't trying to erase you completely. I looked at the documents, then at her trembling hands. You did erase me. On paper. Legally. Publicly. You buried me alive. But the thing about paper is, it burns easily. The truth doesn't. Her lips quivered. I can't ask for forgiveness. Good, I said softly. Then I don't have to give it out of pity. She blinked, confused. Then why did you come? To see if there was anything left of my daughter. For a long while, neither of us moved. The world shrank to the sound of rain, the pond's slow ripples, and her uneven breathing. Finally, she whispered, Is there? I looked at her, really looked. The exhaustion in her eyes, the cracks in her voice, the tremor in her fingers. She was broken, yes, but not hollow. Beneath the guilt, I saw the same fire I once had. There might be, I said, but not if you keep running. She nodded slowly, tears mixing with rain. I want to fix it. You can't fix what you destroyed, I said. But you can learn to build again. The right way this time. Her shoulders shook as she whispered, How do I start? By accepting the consequences. She cried then, the kind of crying that comes from deep inside, not from fear, but from release. The folder slipped from her lap and hit the wet ground, paper scattering. I bent down and picked one up, a photograph of Clara and her children, smiling in front of my house. My house. The image stung, but I slid it back into the folder. They're good kids, I said. They miss you, she whispered. They don't even remember me. They will, she said quickly, desperate. I'll tell them everything. The truth. About what I did. About who you are. I studied her face, her trembling jaw, her eyes swollen but sincere. Maybe for the first time, she wasn't lying. I stood slowly. Clara, I said quietly, I forgive you. She froze. You what? I forgive you, I repeated. But I can't forget. And I can't trust you again. Not yet, maybe not ever. She nodded, sobbing. I understand. Good. Because forgiveness isn't for you. It's for me. I can't carry this weight anymore. She reached for my hand, hesitated, then stopped. Will I ever see you again? I looked at the pond, the water now still. That depends on what kind of person you decide to be after today. When I walked away, she didn't call after me. No pleading, no promises, just quiet. Halfway across the park, I turned once. She was still sitting on the bench, shoulders slumped, head bowed, hands covering her face. Around her, the wind stirred the scattered papers, spinning them into the gray sky. I left her there, surrounded by the mess she'd made, the same way she'd left me once. The circle was complete. That night, back in my cottage, I lit a fire in the small stone hearth. The warmth filled the room, gentle and honest. On the mantel, I placed Eleanor's last letter, the one I'd carried with me for years. I unfolded it slowly, tracing the fading ink with my finger. Arthur, love doesn't vanish. It changes shape. It becomes patience, memory, silence. Don't confuse forgiveness with surrender. Sometimes letting go is the only way to win. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of peace. I poured myself a glass of tea, turned off the lamp, and sat in the flickering firelight. Across the street, Clara's house stood empty, windows dark, the porch light broken. She had lost everything. But maybe, in that emptiness, she'd finally find herself. And as for me, I had nothing left to prove. The world could think whatever it wanted. I had built my final house, not from wood or stone, but from truth. They left me to die, thinking I'd never rise again. But I did, not as a ghost haunting their past, but as a man finally at peace with it. The rain began again, soft and rhythmic. I closed my eyes and whispered, Goodbye, Clara. Goodbye, Eleanor. I'm home. Morning light always finds its way through, even into the homes of those who once lived in shadows. It's been 8 months since the storm settled. 8 months since the house across the street went dark and silent, stripped of laughter and lies. In that time, the world kept moving, slow, indifferent, unbothered. And I learned to move with it. When revenge ends, you expect fireworks, closure, some cinematic feeling of triumph. But the truth is quieter. It comes like dawn, soft, hesitant, reluctant to be noticed. Seattle's winter has its own kind of mercy. The rain never truly stops, but it forgets to hurt. I started walking every morning, just as the sun began pushing through the fog. My cane clicks against the wet pavement, a rhythm that reminds me I'm still here. People nod as they pass, strangers who don't know the weight of the name Arthur Hale, or the stories buried behind my calm smile. And that's the beauty of it. They don't need to know. I rebuilt my life piece by piece, not with bricks or timber this time, but with moments. A cup of coffee that tastes right. The smell of cedar from the little shelf I made. The sound of my neighbor's wind chime dancing in the cold. Small things. But small things are what hold a man together when everything else falls apart. The investigation ended long ago. Clara avoided prison. She stood in court trembling, confessed to her crimes, returned what little she could, and promised the rest. The judge saw a mother, not a monster, and perhaps that was Mercy's way of reminding me to stay human too. Mark filed for divorce soon after. Ethan told me they barely spoke now, but that she was working bookkeeping at a small library outside the city. She takes the bus every day, he said. Keeps to herself. Doesn't complain. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. Her punishment was already complete. She'd have to live every day knowing what she became to the man who gave her everything. But she was still my daughter. And somehow, that truth never stops being true. One Sunday morning, Ethan visited. He brought pastries, still warm, flaky with cinnamon and sugar, just like Eleanor used to bake. We sat by the window, the one overlooking the gray street that had witnessed both my ruin and my redemption. "Dad," he said, "you look different. Lighter." I smiled. Maybe because I finally stopped carrying ghosts. He laughed softly. "She's trying, you know." "Clara." He nodded. "She asked me to tell you she's sorry again. She said she'll never ask for forgiveness, but she hopes you're okay." I stirred my coffee slowly. Steam curled upward, blurring the world beyond. "Tell her I'm alive," I said. "That's enough." That afternoon, I walked to the harbor. The waves slapped against the wooden posts, and seagulls floated above like white paper against a steel sky. The air smelled of salt, of rain, of time. I sat on a bench and pulled out my old sketchbook. Not for architecture, for peace. I sketched boats, children running, an old couple sharing an umbrella. The world kept giving me new things to notice. And I took them all in, like an architect drawing blueprints for a gentler kind of home. The one built inside a man's chest when he finally forgives. Life found me again in unexpected ways. The neighbors began asking for small favors, fixing a fence, mending a door, replacing a porch light. Word spread that the old man on the corner could fix anything. At first, I thought it was charity, people giving me something to do so I wouldn't feel useless. But then I realized they truly needed me. And that felt good. I started keeping tools again, not for building houses, but for building connections. A young couple from down the street brought me dinner every Friday. A widow named Maria came by with tea and stories of her late husband. And one day, the local community center asked if I could teach kids how to build small wooden birdhouses. The first time I stood in front of that class, I was nervous, more than I had been in years. Tiny hands, wide eyes, full of curiosity. One boy raised his hand and asked, "Why do we make houses for birds, mister? They can fly anywhere." I smiled. Even things that can fly need somewhere safe to rest. They nodded like it made sense. And maybe, just maybe, it did. One evening, I returned home to find an envelope in my mailbox. No name, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Clara's. Inside was a folded note and a small pressed flower, a daisy. "Dad, I'm not writing to ask for anything. I just want you to know I've started again. It's not easy, but it's honest this time. The kids are growing. They talk about you. I tell them stories about the man who built a house strong enough to survive everything, even me. I'm learning, Dad. To live, to work, to be better. I don't expect you to forgive me again, but I hope you're proud that I'm trying. Love, Clara." I read it twice. Then again. Each line felt like a slow exhale. I could almost hear Eleanor's voice whispering through it. The warmth, the patience, the grace. I placed the daisy in a glass of water beside Eleanor's photograph. She was smiling in it, just as she had the day I finished building our first home. And for the first time in so long, I whispered aloud, "I did it, Elle. It's done." That night, I sat by the fire, watching the flames sway and crackle. Every creak of the wood reminded me of the houses I'd built, the lives I'd touched, the mistakes I'd made. And through all of it, one truth stood above the rest. You can lose everything, your name, your home, your family, and still build something beautiful again. Because rebuilding isn't about walls or roofs. It's about choosing to wake up one more morning and try again. Spring arrived quietly. The first cherry blossoms appeared near the nursing home, pink, fragile, trembling in the wind. I visited the director one afternoon, the same woman who'd once seen me as just another forgotten patient. "Mr. Hale," she said, smiling warmly. "You look wonderful." "So does this place," I said. "New paint, brighter halls." "Your donation helped," she said softly. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," I replied. "It's where I remembered who I was." As I left, I passed by a man sitting near the window, old, thin, staring into nothing. I placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You're stronger than you think." He looked up at me, eyes wet, and whispered, "Am I?" "Yes," I said. "You just forgot for a while." That night, I carved a new sign for my cottage. I burned the letters slowly, carefully, the way Eleanor used to write our names on wood for each new house we built. When I finished, it read, "Built, lost, rebuilt." I hung it above the doorway. The letters glowed faintly under the lamplight, not as a warning, but as a promise. In the morning, I brewed coffee and opened the window. The smell of wet soil drifted in. Somewhere in the distance, I heard children laughing, a sound so pure it made my chest ache. I closed my eyes and listened. Maybe forgiveness isn't a moment. Maybe it's a process, a quiet, steady rhythm like rain on a roof. They left me for dead. They took everything that defined me. But they forgot something. I was the one who taught them how to build. And building, even after destruction, is what keeps the soul alive. As the sun climbed above the horizon, I whispered one last time, "Goodbye, Clara. Goodbye, Eleanor. Thank you for everything." The light touched the sign above the door. Built, lost, rebuilt. And as I stepped outside into the bright, rain-washed morning, I realized I was finally home.